Today we are talking about a special player, one who went through pure misery, sadness, hardships, and success that did not come easy. It only came with time. The Overwatch community's protagonist, Fearless. Fearless was a player who was actually in the inaugural season of Overwatch League. If you only knew him from Dallas Fuel, even Houston Outlaws, you'd think like, wow, he must have been on one of the best teams that season had to offer. Nope, the good old 0-40 Shanghai Dragons. To make it even worse for him, he had to do an ad being trapped in a car with Matt Mr. X. The poor kid got his first experience on what it feels like to be jailed in the United States. First, we're going to briefly overview the Shanghai Dragons team. It was not good, obviously. There were some good pieces to the roster. Undad was a good hit scan player who got dropped midway through the season for obvious reasons. Geggery was a solid off-tank. Dia was also a good player. They just couldn't muster up a win no matter what they tried. When it comes to Fearless, individually he wasn't that bad, having a few highlights throughout that year, but the mental aspect of losing and losing and losing weighs on you for sure, especially with 40 matches being played throughout the season. Of course, Fearless wasn't there for every match, joining in later on during 2018, but that's aside the point. It can still make you feel hopeless considering the overall vibe everyone else had and experiencing the back end of those losses. Worst of all, this also ruins your reputation as a player. Similar to players who joined the LA Valiant in 2021, who we talked about previously, people will just view you as a joke, even if you're good individually. The public eye won't understand that and will just make the assumption that you're just a garbage player, and surely some other coaches would do the exact same thing. And I've also noticed throughout my time with Overwatch, if a team ever sucks, the tank is always pointed at first since they are the one to initiate engagements, but due to the overall cohesion being so bad, whoever that tank player is will just look awful. When in reality, if you put them in a better situation, their true capabilities will show. So what did this mean for poor Fearless after his time in the United States torture chamber? Well, after 2018, Fearless went to Contenders, grinding it out on Shanghai's academy team called Team CC. He needed to rebuild the name for himself and redeem the community's perception of him. Fearless did not want to be associated with wet wipes. He wanted an actual future. Throughout his 2019 year, he was actually on a team. I'm not going to call the 2018 Shanghai Dragons a team. It was just a disaster. So gauging improvement here is really hard. He looked better, obviously, but comparatively to Shanghai Dragons, is it really improvement? Fearless has better players overall surrounding him, and also his backline isn't altering and 5 King, so that helps as well. Any place Fearless could win a series would be an improvement to what he was dealing with before. But he put in the time, not winning anything in Contenders, but putting up performances good enough for people to actually look at him and notice that he's not a worthless piece of dirt. Also trying to overcome that mental hurdle that was the Shanghai Dragons, where presumably he felt like a piece of shit day in and day out. Personally, it was a shock to me when 2020 rolled around and Fearless returned to Shanghai Dragons. You'd figure Fearless would have some level of PTSD from what he had to deal with before. Like, yes, I know it wasn't the same roster, but still, I'd assume you'd associate Shanghai with complete garbage at this point and not want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. This 2020 roster, though, was filled to the brim with players. Why do we need 4 tanks and 5 DPS? Like, for what? The tank line ended up being Geggery, Stand 1, Fearless, and Void. The DPS was Ding, Fleta, Lip, DM, and Dia, who was on a 2-way contract with Team CC, and the backline was Izayaki, Lee Jae-gon, and Luffy. It was a gargantuan roster. These players were all varying in time. Clearly, Shanghai had no idea this team was a champion-level goldmine until much later on. Lip was not a perma starter, which is absurd to look at, and they even had Stand 1 playing Winston over Fearless, which would immediately raise eyebrows currently, like why on earth would anyone play over Fearless on Winston? But this was before we knew how good Fearless was. He was dipping his toes back into the Overwatch Tier 1 scene, coming from a mildly successful Contenders roster. Fearless wasn't sending other teams to the hospital on tank. He was just performing well enough to return back to Overwatch League. Even with all of these strange swaps, Shanghai was still really successful, having, I believe, the only finals that was a reverse sweep. Seoul vs Shanghai May Melee 2020, considered one of the best matches of all time. This is where that headshot after headshot clip was birthed from the mouth of Benjamin Hook.
Some for all Fearless, hunting for targets. He looks like a lost schoolboy in the field being bullied for his shorts. But Fleder now moving over onto the Widowmaker, taking the clutch into his own hands. The headshot after headshot after headshot. I do not believe what we have just witnessed. The Shanghai Dragons are elite.
Seoul was kinda clapping Shanghai, but they realized on match point, like, guys, wait, we have Lip on our bench and also Fearless who can play Winston? Let's stick them in. And immediately Shanghai looked like a completely different team. The maps were not really close whatsoever. It was like Fearless added this true leadership level Shanghai was missing when Stand 1 played. Every map and fight became more concise. Each player looked to be on the same page, playing to almost perfection and pulling off the reverse sweep. Fearless and Lip stock started to rise after this glorious match, and all it took was these two coming in for that series to be dominated by Shanghai. If these two didn't come in, that May Melee probably would have been a 4-0 for Seoul, but for Fearless individually, he clearly added the intangibles for them to succeed, and the community's perception would only accelerate to how good Fearless actually was. Instead of them swapping in Stand 1, Shanghai realized the same exact thing. Like, forget that kid, he's a piece of fucking garbage. Just put Fearless in as a perma starter. He was fantastic at Winston and ended up fielding Orisa over Stand 1, where I think Stand 1's only hero he would come in for was Ryan. The rest of 2020 was kind of a wash. Shanghai was head and shoulders the best team in APAC. Aside from that one Summer Showdown Genji meta, Fleda Genji just couldn't keep up with Eileen. If they had Who Are You earlier, this would have been an easy 4-0 as well. Going forward, Shanghai dominated the Countdown Cup 4-0 against Hangzhou Spark, and then going into playoffs, people thought like Fearless came back. He added so much to the roster with his Winston performances, these leadership skills. Is he already going to win the league? It would have been an early end to his legendary tale if that was the case. Blizzard did see how Shanghai was being successful, this Fearless story was building, and they decided to give us the infamous Roadhog patch, which destroyed a lot of team seasons. Another shameless plug, but if you want to learn more about what truly happened there, I covered that situation previously as well. Needless to say, lots of teams didn't really have good Roadhog players. Shanghai being one of those teams. They did make top 4, but ended 3rd. Shanghai's go-to was Stand 1 for Roadhog. It just didn't work out, unfortunately. But overall for Fearless, his 2020 year was a massive improvement. 2 years prior, he ended that season losing every match, complete mental distraught, really down bad, comes back to the same franchise, practiced with a real team around him. He wins 2 stages, has incredible Winston performances, he gets Roll Star, and even with all this success, his glow up was only beginning. As 2021 rolled around, Fearless, to most people's shock, decided to leave the Shanghai Dragons, separating upon mutual agreement. He wanted to join the Dallas Fuel, and fate came in to take his place on Shanghai, which honestly may have shaped how this entire year played out, this one roster move, but we'll touch on that later. Fearless going to Dallas did birth one of Overwatch's best tank duos ever in Fearless and Hanbin, alongside Sparkle, Doha, Jexay, and Fielder. Repel was also there, but most people just forget and he barely played anyways. Exy was also supposed to be on this roster too, but he retired before the season started due to medical issues, which forced Dallas Fuel to make different choices with how they play. Going into the season without a hitscan player is going to hurt you somewhat. Initially, Dallas wasn't starting so hot. 2021's very first tournament, May Melee, was a 2-2 split for this squadron, struggling to live up to what was promised, but thankfully something clicked and everyone on Dallas Fuel started to become more coordinated with each other, building their teamwork up to levels almost unseen since the high-level GOATS days. Fearless was showing he wasn't just a Winston guy, he was clearly capable of playing Ryan as well, putting out great performances, really letting the leadership skills show themselves. This Dallas Fuel roster was always praised for their ability to be coordinated or do well in those hive mind comps, where these players just always seemed to be on the same wavelength. I'm not sure who was responsible for it, but they just meshed so well together. It was genuinely amazing to watch. Dallas stormed through the entire tournament they barely made play-ins for, reaching the ultimate battle against Shanghai Dragons. All of Fearless's former teammates, aside from Fate obviously, had no answer to this comp. They attempted to mirror it, but Shanghai couldn't compete. Dallas won the 2021 May Melee 4-2. Fearless had yet another tournament under his belt, winning 2 on Shanghai in 2020, now his first one on Dallas. Earlier in the video, when I mentioned how a player can be great individually, but no one will know this until they're put into a position to succeed, who would have thought that was foreshadowing Fearless's future? It's truly awestrucking. Not everything was positive though. June Joust is where this situation takes a turn for the worst for Fearless here. Yet again, Dallas was dominating North America with their new zombie comp, Winston, Diva, Reaper, Echo, Lucio, Moira. People called it zombie comp because nothing dies, by the way. Most teams just copied this team comp. Of course, there were some who tried other things, but the Dallas Fuel meta was overpowering everyone. Fast forwarding to the actual stage finals where things get interesting, people just thought it was a write-off. Dallas Fuel was just the best. Atlanta Reign was also really good, which was assumed to be the finals. Shanghai and NYXL were not good initially. While NYXL did bomb out, Shanghai was like, alright, let's mirror this Lucio Moira shit, but instead of Winston, we can show Dallas Fuel that Fate can ball, creating this insane turnaround for them. In the lower bracket, Shanghai seemed to have made some sort of adaptation to these teams behind the scenes. Even that rotten-ass Orisa comp looked much better than it did before, to the point of shocking everyone and 3-0ing Atlanta Reign, making it to the finals alongside Dallas, where we now had a rivalry that was starting to build between these two teams. It also made the Fearless story much more interesting because he just left that roster, goes to a new team, wins a tournament against Shanghai, and now Dallas and Shanghai are always meeting in the finals. And the 2021 June Joust is honestly one of the best matches of all time, and if you haven't watched it, you definitely should. Figuring out what's happening might be a bit difficult if you don't understand how that comp is played. Regardless of that, it's still a good watch with plenty of good moments. As the match went on, it was to our shock that Dallas started struggling against this ball comp. It was crazy. They were the meta creators. These were the guys. It got to the point where Fearless started tilting and played Roadhog since he didn't know what to do. Fearless even tried matching the ball at points and nothing was working. Shanghai ended up winning this series 4-3 in a really back and forth series. It was absolutely crazy, which set the meta going forward, and I alluded earlier to this when I said the Fearless Fate swap out shaped the season. If Fearless stayed on Shanghai, this tournament probably would have ended completely different. I don't think anyone would have pulled out the wrecking wheel for the other stages either. Summer Showdown amplified it even more. APAC teams were just way ahead with ball skills. Fearless did try his best to pick it up, making massive improvements compared to when he played it during the June Joust finals, showing yet another ability of Fearless. It seems when you give him time, this guy can pick up any tank you need. Obviously, you do want him on his comfort Winston, but when it comes to ball in 2021, this was the meta for the rest of the season, and I think most people knew that, and he tried his best to get as good as he could before playoffs. As we headed into the final stretch of 2021, I think this was the only year, unless you were a massive fan of a team, we all knew Shanghai was going to win. It was a matter of saying how many maps will Shanghai lose before they win, instead of questioning if Shanghai will win or not. They improved so much on this comp, it was probably Fate's best hero, and the entire team played so well around it to the point other people couldn't compete with it. The only two teams people saw as a threat to Shanghai was obviously Dallas Fuel and Gladiators, who were no jokes, and being the only two teams that even took maps off of Shanghai. Unexpectedly, both Dallas and Gladiators lost in the lower bracket to the Atlanta Reign. Their rush play was just too much for each of them to deal with, and Fearless ended third for the second time in a row, so close to being a champion, yet so far. Fearless just sat there after he lost, watching all of his former teammates on the Dragons pound the ever-living shit out of the Atlanta Reign 4-0, a franchise you aided putting back onto the map, a team you added so much to the previous year, all win the league without you. It probably stung quite a bit to see that. Some would say Fearless's redemption was already completed at this point. He came from the 0-40 Shanghai Dragons, grinding his way through contenders to rebuild himself, joins the Dragons again in 2020, helped them turn the view of Shanghai around completely, now viewed as a good franchise. He finished number 1 seed in the regular season in 2020, the number 2 regular season seed in 2021. He won 3 tournaments overall by the end of 2021, 2 on Shanghai and 1 on Dallas, and got 3rd in playoffs 2 times in a row. And on top of all of this, most people consider him to be the best Winston in the world at this point. His primal mechanics go without saying with how absurd they are. What this man does with Winston is just not possible, but somehow it is because he's doing it. Needless to say, this is a lot of success within the span of 2 years. But after watching his previous team win the league without him, it created this newfound interest for Fearless from the community. His story was becoming more and more enticing. We know he is capable of winning tournaments, but who cares about that now? We want to see him become a champion to fully complete the prophecy. When you lay it out for people to see, Fearless was on what is renowned as the worst goddamn competitive sports team in history. He builds himself back up, then becomes a champion. That is how you finish a career and create a Disney-ass storyline. This is also when people started calling Fearless the Overwatch protagonist. Almost everyone wanted to see him become a champion, and he's come so close 2 times. Going into 2022, Overwatch 2's first competitive year, lots of people were sad about Dallas Fuel due to the 5v5 change. Not seeing Fearless and Hanbin playing together was definitely a blow. These two were so good as main tank and off tank, and lots of Dallas's success the year before was due to this tank line. Having them together is truly a spectacle of the ages, but 2021 was the last we'd ever see of that. And even worse, we didn't see Fearless at all for the beginning of 2022. Hanbin took over the tank duty, being the best Zarya player in the world, forcing this rush style with Reaper, mastered that comp, and got 2nd in kickoff clash. The classic dominant Dallas Fuel power was starting to rush in. Sure, Dallas didn't win, but undoubtedly they would be considered a top team after this tournament was over. All the new additions seemed to be fitting in perfectly. Chio was looking to be one of the best Lucios as a rookie. Strangely enough, Edison was showing really good performances, but we wanted more. We wanted to see how far this roster could take it. Could they actually win it all this time around? Mid-season Madness was the next tournament, and the meta was very diverse for tanks at least. Lots of different heroes were being played, Balls, Winstons, Rhine at times, with the backline always being Bap Zen, since this is when Zen became overtuned, getting that 225 HP, and we finally got to see Fearless, where the team looked like not good. I'm not saying they were awful, at least during the qualifiers. They were winning against teams they should beat and losing to Atlanta in shock. But compared to their previous stage, Dallas looked so much weaker. Now, whether that has to do with everyone struggling overall to play against the new Zen comps, or since Fearless got little playtime, maybe the new teammates were not used to his style, this did add worrying signs for Fearless going forward. Maybe he was struggling to adapt to Overwatch 2. Fate and Void on Shanghai Dragons were having a similar problem, so it's definitely possible. Of course, Dallas struggling is exaggerated slightly during qualifiers because this is relative to the standards the squad was held at, of course. Dallas just got 2nd in the last tournament, so people had high expectations of them. And the player quality on this roster is so high. These guys weren't losing to Paris Eternal or Vancouver Titans in 2022, but honestly nobody was because those teams were shit. Stage playoffs is where the true shocking moment happened. The slight struggles we noticed Dallas having became much worse. Fearless was the starting tank aside from a few maps where Sigma was always played and Hanbin came in. Dallas bombed out faster than PGE talking to a girl. 11th place out of 12th. Looking back and seeing a team with Hanbin, Fearless, Fielder, Chio, and Sparkle getting 11th place in a tournament is just like, wow. They got completely outclassed by Shanghai Dragons and Philadelphia Fusion, only winning a single map before being knocked out. There were rumblings after this tournament of people saying Fearless is starting to fall off, and you can't really argue with those people because the results speak for themselves. 11th out of 12th is just pathetic, and there's nothing else to say. This, of course, was just all part of the Dallas Fuel cycle, giving us a loss of hope and depression until Junker Queen released. Hanbin stood up and took the tank reins, where he was just by far the best in North America. Dallas Fuel immediately went back to dominating everyone, winning the Summer Showdown easily without Fearless playing. I'm sure this did cause another mental distraught moment within the guy. You think to yourself, wow, like when I play, we're shit, but now that Hanbin is perma-starting, the team is good again. This was the second stage that occurred in 2022, so it's at least gonna make you feel shitty to some degree, but instead of crying about it like a little bitch, that must have lit a fire under his ass going forward. Because for Countdown Cup, we didn't see Fearless really at all. Hanbin primarily came in on Diva, Zarya, and Junker Queen, where Fearless came in for about 3 to 4 maps out of all 6 matches they played. Dallas did go 5-1 in this stage to finish out the regular season. They had a tournament win and #1 overall seed. But up to this point, Fearless didn't contribute anything good. The only time he played so far was when Dallas had their worst stage since 2020. But as it goes with Overwatch, sometimes balance patches just come out of nowhere and change everything, which for 2022 playoffs, that's exactly what happened. 2022 playoffs is when Overwatch 2 released to the public, allowing the new hero, Kiriko, to come into prevalence. She was broken, what a shock, right? Her healing output was just unreal at launch. Suzu is Suzu. Teams were still trying to figure out comps for playoffs, presumably utilizing Kiriko in all of them. And from what I know, teams like Seoul Dynasty were actually using Roadhog, having quite a bit of success with it, until a Dallas Fuel moment happened, discovering the team comp everyone else just copied. Winston, Reaper, Sojourn, Lucio, Kiriko. This was a 100% pick rate, similar to the June Joust we talked about earlier. You needed to play this everywhere, and most importantly for Dallas, Fearless is going to need to step it up from what we saw in the mid-season. He is their Winston player, so he doesn't really have a choice here. The guy has yet another opportunity to become a champion, and from those performances we saw from this squad in mid-season, honestly, him becoming a champion did not look likely. So he really needed to step it up. And step it up, his ass did. Being the team who created the comp, you'd expect them to be the best at it, which they were for a while. They were just leaps and bounds better than everyone else. The first match against Hangzhou was a 3-1 victory. After this match, the next opponent was Seoul Dynasty, where they got completely flattened by Dallas. This team was just the best at this comp. I mean, they created it, so obviously you'd expect that. But most importantly, Fearless looked to be in 2021 form again. His Winston performances were so good, it was the largest contributor to why these matches were being won so easily. Fearless makes so much space for his team, and especially Edison, since he's playing Sojourn. The more room he has and more opportunities he has to get kills, that means more teamfight wins for Dallas. Earlier when I said a fire was lit under Fearless's ass, this is what I meant. During that Countdown Cup period, he must have really been practicing trying to figure out how to truly defeat the boss that is known as 5v5. Everyone looked to be on the same page, and the 2021 Dallas Hive Mind was back. The next opponent who stood in Dallas's way was the Houston Outlaws, who came off of knocking Shock into the lower bracket, which they, of course, come into play later on. When it comes to Houston Outlaws, they looked good in the first map, taking it away from Dallas, but the rest of that series was not really close, and Dallas beat them 3-1. And for the first time, Fearless made it. He wasn't watching someone else win. He could actually play with the opportunity to be a champion this time around. It was just a matter of time to see who was going to be their opponent. After Shock got put into the lower bracket, they had a historical Shock moment of just burning through every team, improving and improving day by day. Proper was dominating the best Sojourns who stood up to him. Everyone else was firing on all cylinders, beating Houston and reaching the finals against Dallas Fuel. This match actually had so many interesting storylines behind it, If Shock won the finals, Proper would most likely win finals MVP, having the best season any person ever has in Overwatch history. I mean, he kind of already did, but this would add more to it. Shock would be a franchise champion 3 times. Also, Violet and Striker would be the first 3-time champions. If Dallas wins, Rascal would be the first 3-time champion. Dallas would be the third of the inaugural season's bottom 4 teams to win the league, and Fearless would finish the rags to riches story. These narratives alone probably made this one of the best matches of all time immediately, but it couldn't be a 4-map boring snooze fest of a series. It needed to be good. Most people thought Dallas was just going to 4-0 Shock and the match would be over fast, but that was far from the truth. This series was very competitive for the most part. Both teams were taking maps off of each other. Players who were new to the Overwatch computer game probably questioned what they were looking at, since most players cannot comprehend this stuff unless Sojourn kills someone, which there was plenty of. Proper was kinda running Edison's pockets in the first half, where Shock actually just looked better at some points. And this was 100% Dallas's match to lose. This group of players were never going to have an opportunity better than this one. The meta was absolutely perfect for each of them. Chio and Fielder were both insane at Lucio and Kiriko, Sparkle and Edison on both Reaper and Sojourn. Then most importantly, Fearless on Winston, who most see as the best Winston of all time. So when Shock was up 3-2 in that finals, it was anus clinching. If you watched that match live, you could not tell me your asshole was not melted. I don't really root for teams very often, but I really wanted Dallas to win, and I think lots of people did, mainly for Fearless, to watch his redemption come full circle. Again, experiencing being on one of the worst rosters ever, getting so close in 2020, then watching his old team win without him in 2021, he needed to win now. He's never going to have an opportunity this good again. And it seems Dallas Fuel realized this exact same thing in those final 2 maps. Edison grabbed a suitcase, he took Proper, squeezed him in that thing, and sent his ass flying back to Korea, being absolutely stone cold. Edison was putting Proper into the ground. For Fearless, the last 2 maps were just him saying that he is the best Winston in the game. A complete and utter Sojourn and Monkey Gap. The Shock couldn't handle the pressure, and they just folded against Dallas. On the final map, we finally knew that it was Fearless's time.
Fearless in the front line all the time. Is the sound barrier coming out for San Francisco? They get it on 5 players, and Fielder's going to struggle now. Proper's found him. There's an opening here. There's a chance, but Sparkle shuts Finn down. San Francisco in a 4 versus 3, but Addison from the top rope hits him with the RKO. Striker wants to try and chase him down. Gets his revenge, and Chio won't struggle here. Violet's able to find the kill, and the Shock aren't done.
You're going to have a 6 spawn advantage here for the Dallas Fuel, though.
Only 2 players here for San Francisco. It's not much to work with here. How do they touch the cart? The bubble's going to be there. Violet's going to be forced away. He's in grave danger. Grave danger indeed. The touch is there from Striker. He has a death blossom, but there's no chance.
He did it. The guy fucking did it. After all the years of torment and trying to become a champion, he finally did it. Having a rough start to his season, where rumblings of thinking the guy was starting to fall off was going around, getting 11th in mid-season is just awful for the standards of this team. It must have just been a fluke, apparently. Fearless won the finals MVP, and his years of grinding finally paid off. The community was ecstatic for him, of course, especially if you've been watching him since Season 1 and followed him up to this point. People call him the Overwatch main character because of this story. His rags to riches experience is enough to show his perseverance and dedication to himself and not give up to become something he always wanted to be, a champion. Fearless, of course, did play a little bit more in 2023 on Houston Outlaws, where the guy finally retired afterwards, but the redemption story was finished after 2022, and the Houston Outlaws saga was just more of a highlight. There's no real point of talking about it here because it doesn't add anything. All we can say about Fearless is that he has one of the most interesting personality stories like ever. Stuff like that doesn't happen very often unless you're watching Straight Outta Compton maybe. Fearless could fit there possibly. His story is in the same vein at the very least. So it now bears the question. Do you think Fearless is the greatest player ever, or how do you feel about his story overall? Make sure to leave your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching to the end. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already and leave a like on this video. And also check out my other video on the first girl Overwatch pro player. That was a wild ride and it was filled with a lot of toxic and eye-opening moments. They were pretty over the top.